A mother's worst nightmare, her baby crying in the dead of night, but when she rushes in, someone else is already there. Watching. Waiting. Smiling. They thought they escaped, but evil never lets go. The haunting has just begun. 3 disturbing true parenting horror stories. Stay till the end, if you dare. James and Emily had always wanted a child. After years of struggling with infertility, they were overjoyed when they finally adopted a baby girl named Lily. The moment they brought her home, their lives changed forever, but not in the way they expected. The house they lived in was a quiet suburban home, surrounded by towering pine trees. It had been in Emily's family for generations, and she had spent her own childhood running through its hallways. But the moment Lily arrived, strange things began to happen. It started small, just odd noises in the night. A faint whispering sound coming from the baby monitor. At first, Emily brushed it off as static, but the whispers became clearer, almost forming words. One night, as she lay in bed half asleep, she heard it again. "Don't let him take her." Her blood ran cold. She sat up, clutching James's arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. James stirred, groggy. "Hear what?" Emily pointed at the baby monitor on the nightstand. It was silent now, except for Lily's soft breathing. "I heard a voice," Emily said, her pulse racing. James sighed. "It's just interference. These things pick up signals all the time." But Emily wasn't convinced. The next night, she stayed up late, watching the baby monitor screen. The nursery was dimly lit by a soft nightlight, casting shadows across the crib. Lily slept peacefully, but then, Emily's heart nearly stopped. The rocking chair beside the crib moved. At first, it was slow, almost unnoticeable. Then it creaked, rocking more forcefully. Emily jumped up and ran into the nursery. The chair was still. The only sound was Lily's steady breathing. A chill settled over her skin. She stepped closer to the crib, her hands trembling. As she leaned over to check on Lily, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. There were small fingerprints on the crib railing, too small for an adult, yet not Lily's. Emily felt a presence behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. That night, she barely slept. The next morning, she told James everything. "I think something's wrong with this house," she said. "With Lily's room." James rubbed his temples. "Emily, we've been through so much to get her. Let's not start imagining things." But Emily wasn't imagining it. The whispers, the rocking chair, the fingerprints, they were real. And soon, they would realize just how real the nightmare was. The next morning, Emily called her mother. "Mom, did anything strange ever happen in this house?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Her mother hesitated. "Why would you ask that?" Emily explained everything, the voices, the moving chair, the things she had seen on the monitor. There was silence on the other end. Then, her mother whispered, "Oh, God." "What?" Emily pressed. Her mother sighed. "I didn't want to tell you. I thought it was just an old family story. But, when I was a little girl, I had a baby brother." Emily's stomach dropped. "His name was Thomas," her mother continued, her voice shaky. "He died in that nursery." Emily clutched the phone tighter. "How?" Her mother hesitated again, then finally said, "They said it was Sid's. But I remember my parents whispering. My father said something took him. That he saw something standing over the crib the night Thomas died." Emily felt like she couldn't breathe. "Mom," she whispered. "I think it's still here." Her mother's voice was barely audible. "Get out of that house." That night, Emily and James decided to sleep with Lily in their room. But at exactly 2:47 a.m., Lily woke up screaming. Emily sat up in bed, heart pounding. James reached for the lamp and switched it on. And that's when they saw it. 3 long, deep scratches running down Lily's tiny arm. Emily let out a strangled sob, clutching her daughter. James jumped out of bed and ran to the nursery. Seconds later, he came back, his face pale as death. "The crib," he whispered. Emily forced herself to walk into the nursery, holding Lily close. Her stomach turned. There were scratches all over the crib's wooden railing. Deep, jagged marks, as if something had been clawing at it for years. And then, the whisper came again. But this time, it wasn't from the baby monitor. It was right behind her. "He belongs to me." Emily turned, but the room was empty. The rocking chair was moving again. But now, there was someone sitting in it. Emily's scream echoed through the house. The figure in the rocking chair sat perfectly still, its hollow eyes locked onto hers. James rushed in behind her, but the moment he stepped into the room, the chair stopped moving. The figure was gone. But the scratches on Lily's arm were real. Emily held her daughter tightly, her whole body shaking. "We have to leave," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. James, pale and visibly shaken, nodded. "I'll book a hotel. Pack a bag." As Emily gathered Lily's things, she noticed something strange. The floor beneath the crib felt uneven. She knelt down, pressing her hand against the wooden planks. There was a slight gap in one of them. A loose board. Her heart pounded. She moved the crib aside and pried the board up. Beneath it was a small, metal handle. "What the hell?" James muttered, crouching beside her. Emily grabbed the handle and pulled. The floor creaked loudly as a hidden trapdoor swung open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading downward. A basement. But they had never known this house had a basement. Emily and James exchanged a glance. Then, from the blackness below, they heard it. A soft, wheezing breath. James grabbed a flashlight from the drawer. He hesitated, then started down the steps. Emily didn't want him to go alone, but someone had to stay with Lily. "Be careful," she whispered. James nodded and disappeared into the darkness. Seconds stretched into minutes. The air felt thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Then, suddenly, James screamed. Emily's blood ran cold. She rushed to the opening. "James." Footsteps pounded up the stairs, and James burst out of the hole, his face twisted in horror. "Close it," he gasped. Emily slammed the trapdoor shut, shoving the crib back over it. James collapsed onto the floor, his breathing ragged. His hands were covered in dust and something dark. Emily's voice was shaking. "What did you see?" James swallowed hard. His next words made Emily's stomach churn. "There were bones." Her hands went cold. "Bones?" James nodded, his face pale. "Small ones. Children's bones." Emily felt like she was going to be sick. Then James said something even worse. "There was a crib down there. A really old one." Emily clutched Lily tighter. And then, in a whisper, James added. "It was rocking." James refused to go back down there. Instead, he started researching the house's history. After hours of digging, he finally found something. An old newspaper article, dated 1963. It read. "Local couple vanishes after infant son found dead in home." Thomas and Eleanor Grayson disappeared under mysterious circumstances after their 6-month-old son, Thomas Jr., was found unresponsive in his crib. The coroner ruled it as sudden infant death syndrome, but neighbors reported hearing strange noises from the home for weeks before the incident. Police discovered a hidden basement beneath the nursery, but what they found inside was never disclosed. The house has been abandoned ever since. Emily's head spun. "That's my mother's family," she whispered. She had a baby brother named Thomas. James turned the screen toward her. His voice was tight. Emily, look at the picture. She did. It was an old, black and white photo of the Grayson family. Her mother was a little girl, standing beside her parents. In her father's arms was an infant boy. But in the background, barely visible in the shadows, was a tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes. The same thing Emily had seen in the nursery. Her stomach dropped. This thing, it's been here for decades. The final warning. That night, they made a decision. They were leaving. Emily packed their bags, refusing to spend another night in that cursed house. But at 2:47 a.m., Lily woke up crying. Emily reached for her, whispering, "Shoo, baby, it's okay." Then she froze. There were fingerprints on the blanket. Small, childlike fingerprints made of dust and ash. And on the baby monitor. A voice, clear as day. "Don't take her." The closet door creaked open. And something stepped out. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The closet door inched open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Then, a shape moved. A thin, bony hand gripped the doorframe, its fingers unnaturally long. Slowly, a gaunt, hollow-eyed figure stepped forward, its body impossibly tall, its face twisted in a grotesque, inhuman grin. Emily clutched Lily tighter, her heart slamming against her ribs. James yanked Emily backward, shielding them both as he grabbed the bedside lamp and hurled it toward the closet. The moment the light shattered, the figure vanished. But the baby monitor crackled to life again. A whisper, low, raspy, and furious. "She belongs here." The bedroom door slammed shut. James lunged for the doorknob, twisting and pulling, but it wouldn't budge. Emily whimpered as Lily's cries grew louder. She gasped when she saw something horrifying. The scratches on Lily's arm had deepened, as if unseen hands were carving into her skin. "James!" Emily sobbed. "It's hurting her." James threw his entire weight against the door. Bang! It wouldn't move. Then, a cold breath whispered against Emily's ear. "You shouldn't have come back." She screamed. And suddenly, the door burst open. James nearly fell forward as the weight keeping it shut vanished. Without hesitation, he grabbed Emily's hand and dragged her and Lily out of the room. But as they bolted down the hall, Emily glanced back one last time. The closet door was wide open. Inside stood the figure. Watching. Waiting. Smiling, they didn't stop running until they were outside. James fumbled for the car keys. Emily turned, half expecting the thing to be standing on the porch, but the house was silent. Still. They jumped into the car, James jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Just as they sped off, the front door of the house creaked open, by itself. Emily's stomach twisted. It was letting them leave. For now, they checked into a motel that night. Emily refused to sleep, sitting up with Lily in her arms, her body tense and trembling. James spent hours researching. He called an old local historian the next morning. When he explained everything, the man went dead silent. Then he sighed and said, "You need to listen carefully." Emily leaned in. "That house, it's cursed," the man said. "The Grayson family weren't the only ones. Every child who has ever slept in that nursery, died. Some vanished without a trace. The house was abandoned for years, but the few who tried living there, they all left in the middle of the night." Emily's blood turned to ice. What does it want?" There was a long pause. Then, in a grim voice, the man said, "It wants the baby." Emily's grip on Lily tightened. "It lures families in. Lets them feel safe. And then it takes what it's been waiting for." Emily shook her head. No. No, we got away. The man exhaled. Did you? Silence. Then, Emily heard it. A soft creak from the motel room closet. She turned her head slowly. The closet door was open. The closet door stood open. The rocking chair inside moved on its own, creaking softly in the dim motel light. Emily's breath hitched. She clutched Lily so tightly that the baby whimpered. James grabbed her arm. We need to leave. Now. Emily barely managed a nod. She turned toward the door. And froze. The motel mirror reflected their room perfectly, except for one thing. There was something standing behind them. A tall, gaunt figure, its hollow eyes locked onto Lily. And it was grinning. Nowhere to run. The lights in the motel flickered violently. The air grew thick and suffocating, as if unseen hands were pressing down on them. The baby monitor in Emily's bag crackled to life again, even though they weren't in the house anymore. A whisper, clear as death. She belongs to me. James grabbed their bags. Go. They bolted for the door. But the moment James touched the knob, it twisted in his grip. The door slammed shut on its own. Emily screamed. Then. The room went pitch black. And inside, a rocking chair moved. Lily let out a sharp, shrill wail. Emily struggled to breathe in the darkness, her body paralyzed by a cold unlike anything she had ever felt. Then. Thump. A noise from the closet. Then another. Thump. Something was crawling out. Emily's hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone flashlight. She clicked it on. And nearly dropped it. The figure was standing inches away from her. Its head was tilted unnaturally to the side, as if its neck had been broken. Its hollow eyes gleamed with hunger. And in its long, skeletal fingers. It was reaching for Lily. Emily's body snapped into motion. No. She's mine, she screamed, pulling Lily away. The figure's grin widened. And then, it spoke. Not for long. A mother's rage. Something inside Emily snapped. She wasn't going to let this thing take her child. With a primal scream, she lunged forward, grabbing the motel's bedside lamp and smashing it into the figure's face. Glass shattered. The creature let out an inhuman screech, stumbling backward. The motel walls shook violently, as if the whole building was coming down. James reached the door again, this time, it flung open. They ran. Down the motel corridor, past the empty lobby, into the freezing night air. They jumped into the car. James sped off, gravel kicking up behind them. But in the rearview mirror, Emily saw something that made her stomach drop. The motel door was still wide open. And in the doorway, the figure stood. Watching. Smiling. As if it knew, this wasn't over, they didn't stop driving until they reached the outskirts of town. James pulled over, his hands shaking. We need to end this. Emily nodded, heart racing. The house. It started there. There was only one way to make sure this thing never came for Lily, or anyone else, again. Just before dawn, they returned to the house. The sky was an eerie shade of gray, the world still half asleep. Emily clutched Lily close as James poured gasoline all over the floorboards. She stood by the nursery door, staring at the crib. The scratches on the wood seemed deeper now. And then, the whisper came again. You can't stop me. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. The crib moved. The rocking chair tipped over. And something rushed toward her. She barely had time to react before James flicked the lighter and dropped it. Flames exploded across the wooden floor. The house screamed. Not just the creaking of burning wood, a real, agonized scream, as if the house itself was alive and in pain. As they ran outside, Emily turned back for one last look. Through the flames, she saw it. The figure. Standing in the nursery. Burning. But still smiling. Then, the roof collapsed. And the house was gone. The fire department ruled it an accident. No one questioned them. Emily and James left town that night. They never looked back. For a while, things were normal. Lily slept peacefully. The nightmares stopped. The baby monitor stayed silent. Until one night. Months later. Emily woke up to the sound of whispers. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. The baby monitor was on. And in the speaker. A voice. Low, raspy. Did you think it was that easy? Then. A soft creak came from Lily's room. Emily turned her head. The rocking chair was moving.